They thought they understood you, not because they ever listened to you, not because they ever cared enough to ask what lived beneath your silence, but because people have an obsession with reducing others into something they can predict. They see one chapter and convince themselves they've read the entire book. One mistake, and suddenly they believe they've measured your entire character. One moment of weakness, and they assume they've discovered your permanent limits. That is how the world protects itself, not by seeking truth, but by simplifying anything too complex to understand. You were never simple. You only became quiet. There is a difference, a dangerous difference. Silence is often mistaken for surrender by people who have never learned what real strength sounds like. They assume the quiet person has nothing left to say. They assume the calm person has already accepted defeat. They assume the one who walks away is the one who lost. They never stop to consider another possibility. What if silence isn't surrender? What if it's construction? What if every word left unspoken is another brick being placed beneath the surface? What if every insult ignored, every betrayal absorbed, every disappointment carried without announcement isn't making someone weaker, but forging something the world has never prepared itself to face? Most people believe transformation is loud. They imagine explosions, arguments, declaration, grand announcements, telling everyone they have changed. But reality, real transformation, is almost invisible. It happens when nobody is watching, late at night, early in the morning, inside conversations that never happen aloud, inside decisions nobody celebrates, inside moments where someone quietly chooses, I will never become that version of myself again. No applause, no audience. Just a single decision, repeated again and again, until the old identity quietly disappears. Nobody notices the day it happens, because evolution doesn't ask for witnesses. It simply continues. The world only notices the result, and by then, it's already too late, because once someone has rebuilt themselves from the inside, nothing outside can return them to who they were. That terrifies people. Not because you've become cruel, not because you've become emotionless, but because you've become independent from their approval. Approval is one of the oldest currencies humanity has ever invented. People spend entire lives chasing it, changing their personality opinions, hiding their intelligence, suppressing their ambition, pretending not to care, pretending to care too much, all to receive something as temporary as acceptance. You used to play that game, everyone does, until reality teaches the lesson no teacher ever explains. Approval expires. Respect earned from pretending disappears the moment you stop performing. Love built upon masks collapses the moment the mask falls. Friendships created through convenience vanish when you become inconvenient. That realization hurts. It hurts because it forces one impossible question. Who actually knows me? Not the version I perform, not the version I advertise, not the version designed for comfort. The real one. The one that exists when nobody is looking. Most people never answer that question because answering honestly requires destroying every illusion they've spent years protecting. You chose differently. You looked directly at your own reflection, not the physical one, the internal one, the one carrying every disappointment, every broken expectation, every abandoned dream, every conversation that ended differently than you imagined, every version of yourself that never survived. You didn't run. That was the beginning, not the beginning of confidence, the beginning of honesty. Confidence without honesty becomes arrogance. Honesty without confidence becomes suffering. But when both exist together, something entirely different is born. Clarity. And clarity changes everything because clarity doesn't negotiate. It doesn't ask people to understand. It doesn't wait for permission. It simply reveals reality exactly as it is. Reality isn't gentle. Reality doesn't reward effort equally. Reality doesn't guarantee fairness. Reality doesn't apologize. It simply exists. Most people spend their lives arguing with reality, demanding different outcomes, complaining about difficult circumstances, waiting for justice to arrive. But reality has never responded to complaints. It only responds to adaptation. That is why storms don't ask trees whether they're ready. That is why oceans don't apologize before drowning ships. That is why time never slows for broken hearts. Nature has always respected one thing above all else: strength, not loud strength, not violent strength, enduring strength, the kind that survives, the kind that bends without breaking, the kind that loses everything and somehow continues moving forward. That strength cannot be taught. It can only be earned. Usually, through pain. Pain has a language few people ever learn. Most only hear the screaming, very few hear the lesson. Pain never arrives asking permission. It doesn't check your schedule. It doesn't care how prepared you feel. It simply enters, takes everything it wants, and leaves you standing in front of a decision: become bitter or become different. Most choose bitterness because bitterness feels easier. It requires no discipline, no reflection, no responsibility, just blame. Blame everyone, blame childhood, blame society, blame luck, blame timing, blame betrayal. Blame anyone except the only person capable of rebuilding what remains: yourself. You almost stayed there too. Almost. But something inside you refused. Not because you were fearless, because you became exhausted from carrying anger that never healed anything, exhausted from replaying conversations that could never change, exhausted from expecting people to become versions of themselves they never intended to be. One day, without ceremony, you stopped asking why and started asking, what now? Those two words changed your life, because why me looks backward. What now looks forward. One question creates victims, the other creates architects. You stopped waiting for rescue. You stopped expecting apologies. You stopped believing closure had to come from someone else. Instead, you built your own, brick by brick, decision by decision, day after day. Nobody noticed. They were too busy remembering the person you used to be. That's the strange thing about people. They freeze others in old versions. Someone who knew you 5 years ago often speaks as though that person still exists. They cannot imagine the battles you've fought in silence, the habits you've destroyed, the fears you've buried, the discipline you've built. They continue speaking to your past, standing in front of your future. And when they finally realize you've changed, they become uncomfortable. Not because transformation is wrong, because transformation reminds them of everything they've postponed becoming. That's why growth makes insecure people angry. It exposes possibility, and possibility demands responsibility. There comes a point when people stop recognizing you, not because your face changes, not because your voice sounds different, but because the version of you they built inside their minds no longer exists. That realization confuses them. They remember the person who apologized too quickly, the one who explained every decision, the one who carried guilt that never belonged to them, the one who believed kindness meant sacrificing themselves for everyone else's comfort. But that person is gone, not erased, evolved. People often mistake evolution for betrayal. When you stop accepting disrespect, they say you've changed. When you stop chasing approval, they say you've become arrogant. When you stop explaining yourself, they call you cold. It has nothing to do with who you've become. It has everything to do with the fact they no longer benefit from who you used to be. That truth is difficult for most people to accept because relationships built on imbalance always resist balance. The moment you stop carrying all the weight, everyone suddenly notices how heavy it is. For years, you believed your value came from what you could give. your time, your patience, your energy, your understanding, your forgiveness. You handed pieces of yourself away, believing generosity would create belonging, instead created expectation. People rarely appreciate what becomes predictable. They simply expect it. The day you stop giving, they don't remember everything you already gave. They only notice what they're no longer receiving. That is why boundaries reveal more truth than conversations ever will. A boundary is a mirror. Some people see it and respect it. Others see it and become offended, not because the boundary is unfair, because it limits their access. Access is one of the most misunderstood forms of power. Not everyone deserves it, not everyone values it, and not everyone loses it for the same reason. Sometimes, people lose access to you because they never learned how to value your presence while they had it. Silence taught you something words never could. Not every goodbye needs to be spoken. Some endings happen quietly, a message never answered, an invitation never accepted, a conversation that simply doesn't happen again. No anger, no revenge, just distance. Distance has a strange effect on truth. It removes emotion and leaves only patterns. You begin remembering things differently, not through the emotions you felt, through the behavior you ignored. The excuses, the inconsistencies, the empty promises, the moments your intuition whispered, while your heart begged you not to listen. You remember all of it, not with resentment, with clarity. And clarity has no interest in revenge because revenge keeps you emotionally attached. Freedom does not. One of the greatest misconceptions about strength is that strong people never feel pain. They do, perhaps more deeply than anyone else. The difference is what they do with it. Pain entered your life expecting to become your identity. Instead, it became your teacher. Every disappointment taught discernment, every betrayal taught observation, every loss taught detachment, every failure taught humility. Eventually, you stopped asking life to become easier. You became harder to break. That frightened people, because someone who no longer fears discomfort becomes impossible to manipulate. Fear is the oldest leash in existence. Fear of rejection, fear of loneliness, fear of failure, fear of judgment. Fear keeps people obedient. It convinces them to shrink, to stay quiet, to remain acceptable. But once fear loses its authority, something remarkable happens. You stop negotiating with your own potential. You begin acting not according to comfort, according to conviction. Conviction changes the way you walk, the way you speak, the way you enter a room, not because you're trying to appear powerful, because you're no longer trying to appear anything. Authenticity has a presence performance can never imitate. People feel it before they understand it. Some admire it, some resent it, some become inspired, others become threatened. The reaction doesn't matter, because your identity can no longer be rented out to public opinion. There was a time when criticism destroyed your peace. Now, simply reveals the perspective of the person speaking. Someone else's inability to understand you is no longer evidence that you should understand yourself less. That lesson cost you years, but it was worth every moment because now you know something that cannot be unlearned. Not everyone deserves an explanation. Not every accusation deserves a defense. Not every misunderstanding deserves correction. Sometimes, silence protects more truth than arguments ever could, and perhaps that is what truly changed you. Not the pain, not the betrayal, not the loneliness, but the realization that peace begins the moment you stop asking people to see what they have already chosen not to look for. There is something no one tells you about becoming stronger. It doesn't happen the day you decide to change. It happens the day you realize you no longer recognize the person who once begged to be understood. That version of you still exists somewhere, like an old photograph tucked away in a forgotten drawer. You can look at it, you can remember it, but you can never live inside it again, because once awareness changes you, ignorance is no longer a place you can return to. People think transformation is dramatic. They imagine a single conversation, a single victory, a single heartbreak powerful enough to rewrite an entire life. But that isn't how real change works. Real change is painfully ordinary. It happens every time you choose discipline over impulse. Every time you refuse to chase someone who already chose distance. Every time you walk away from disrespect without announcing your departure. Every time you remain silent. When your ego begs you to prove a point. Those moments never make headlines. No one applauds them. No one even notices. But your character notices. And character is built in moments the world never sees. That is why some people carry quiet confidence. It isn't gifted, it is accumulated. One difficult decision at a time. You used to believe confidence meant certainty. Now you understand something deeper. Confidence is moving forward without certainty. Because certainty belongs to fantasy, reality offers probabilities. Never guarantees waiting until you feel completely ready. Is simply another form of fear, wearing a respectable mask. Fear has always been clever. It rarely introduces itself honestly. It calls itself caution. It calls itself logic. It calls itself preparation. Meanwhile, years disappear. Dreams become memories before they ever become reality. Potential grows old, waiting for permission. You finally saw through the disguise. You realized the perfect moment was never coming. Life wasn't waiting for you to feel ready. It was simply moving, with or without you. That realization hurt. But pain caused by truth always heals faster than comfort built on illusion. There was another lesson. One that took even longer to understand. Not everyone who leaves is a loss. Some departures are protection disguised as disappointment. At first, you mourn them. You question yourself. You wonder what you could have done differently. Then time begins revealing things emotion refused to show. You notice the imbalance, the one-sided effort. The conversations where only one person cared enough to repair what was breaking. You realize you weren't losing people. You were losing illusions. And illusions always hurt when they collapse, because they were never built from reality. They were built from hope. Hope is beautiful. Until it convinces you to ignore evidence. You ignored evidence for too long. Not because you were foolish, because you believed people meant what they said. Eventually, you learned something more reliable. Believe patterns, words create possibilities, parts reveal truth. Once you began watching actions instead of promises, everything changed. Suddenly, confusion disappeared. Manipulation became obvious. Excuses sounded repetitive, intentions became visible. Not because people changed, because your perception did. Awareness is irreversible. Once you see clearly, you cannot force yourself to become blind again. Some people hated that version of you, not because you became difficult, because you became impossible to deceive. There is a unique loneliness that comes with seeing people accurately, not judging them, not hating them, simply seeing them. You stop expecting honesty from those committed to pretending. You stop expecting loyalty from those devoted only to convenience. You stop expecting maturity from people still at war with themselves. Acceptance replaces expectation, and strangely, acceptance feels lighter, not because reality becomes easier, because resistance disappears. You stop arguing with facts. You stop negotiating with obvious truths. You stop chasing outcomes already trying to escape. That is freedom, not controlling life, but refusing to waste your energy fighting what has already revealed itself. Some people called this detachment. They misunderstood. Detachment isn't the absence of love, it's the absence of desperation. You can care deeply without abandoning yourself. You can love completely Without losing your identity, you can help others without becoming responsible for their choices. That distinction saved your life because for years, you confused sacrifice with love. You believed exhaustion proved devotion. You believed suffering proved loyalty. You believed carrying everyone else's burdens made you valuable. It didn't. It only made you tired. Real strength doesn't come from carrying everything. It comes from knowing what is actually yours to carry. Some battles belong to other people. Some lessons cannot be learned through advice. Some pain must complete its work. You finally stopped interrupting other people's consequences. That wasn't cruelty, it was wisdom. Growth requires responsibility. Responsibility cannot exist if someone else constantly absorbs the cost. Perhaps that is the hardest truth of all. You cannot save someone who is committed to remaining the same. No amount of love can replace someone's willingness to change. No amount of patience can create discipline inside another person. No amount of sacrifice can force awareness into a sleeping mind. You learned that every person eventually meets themselves. Some meet themselves early, some meet themselves late, some spend an entire lifetime running from the introduction, but eventually, silence catches everyone, and when it does, there are no distractions left. Only truth, only memory, only the question. What kind of person did I become while no one was watching? That question became your compass. Not success, not recognition, not applause. Character, because reputation belongs to other people. Character belongs to you. Reputation changes with rumors. Character changes only through choices, and every choice quietly shapes the person you must eventually become. There is a moment, so quiet, so ordinary, that almost no one notices it. It isn't the moment you become powerful. It is the moment you stop needing everyone else to believe that you are. That is where freedom begins. Not in victory, not in recognition, not in revenge, in independence. Because the strongest people in the world are rarely the loudest. They don't spend their lives announcing their worth. They don't chase validation through attention. They don't argue with every opinion. They don't fight every battle. They have discovered something most people never do. Energy is finite. Every unnecessary argument is borrowed from tomorrow's purpose. Every attempt to convince someone determined to misunderstand you is energy that could have built your future. So you stopped explaining, not because you had nothing to say, because silence became more valuable than proving a point. The world interpreted your silence as weakness. It always does. People mistake restraint for inability. They confuse patience with fear. They confuse kindness with surrender. Until one day, reality corrects them. Not through your words, through your life, because results have a language excuses can never translate. By the time they finally understood, you had already moved beyond needing their understanding. That is the irony of growth. The people who doubted you usually arrive only after the transformation is complete. When the discipline is invisible, they laugh. When the results become visible, they call it talent. They never see the mornings you chose consistency over comfort. They never see the nights you battled your own mind while everyone else slept peacefully. They never see the thousands of invisible victories that created the one visible success they now admire. People celebrate outcomes. Life rewards process. You learn to fall in love with the process. That changed everything, because when your identity becomes connected to discipline, success is no longer luck, it becomes inevitable, slow, sometimes painfully slow, but inevitable. There was once a version of you who wanted everyone to understand the journey. Now, you don't mind if they never do. Your peace no longer depends on being correctly interpreted. That is maturity. Not becoming emotionless, becoming emotionally self-sufficient. The world cannot control someone whose emotional state no longer depends on public opinion. That realization frightened people. Not because you became dangerous, because you became unavailable to manipulation. Manipulation always begins with dependency, the need to be liked, the need to be chosen, the need to be accepted. Remove the need, and manipulation loses its foundation. You didn't stop loving people, you stopped abandoning yourself to keep them. There is an enormous difference. Some called you selfish. You smiled, because healthy people often look selfish. To those who benefited from their lack of boundaries, you no longer argued. Truth doesn't become stronger through debate. It becomes stronger through consistency. You simply continued becoming the person you promised yourself you would become, one day at a time, one decision at a time, one disciplined action after another. Looking back, you realize something unexpected. The monster never actually existed. That was merely the name people gave to the version of you they could no longer control. They called your boundaries arrogance. Your silence became attitude. Your confidence became intimidation. Your independence became rebellion. Nothing about you became monstrous. Only unfamiliar. People often fear what refuses to obey expectations. They don't fear darkness. They fear unpredictability. They fear someone who can no longer be manipulated through guilt, fear, or approval. And that person became you, not overnight, not through anger, not through revenge, through countless invisible choices made when nobody was watching. If there is one truth worth carrying from everything you've survived, it is this: life will test you long before it rewards you. It will ask for discipline before motivation, patience before results, faith before evidence. Most people quit during the questions. Very few remain long enough to become the answer. You remained not because you always believed, because you refused to surrender, even on the days when hope felt silent, even on the nights when progress became invisible, even when no one applauded, even when nobody understood. You continued. That is why today you no longer seek permission. You no longer seek validation. You no longer seek revenge. You seek alignment. Alignment between your words, your actions, and your character, because once those three become one, nothing outside you has enough power to break what exists within. Perhaps that is what true strength has always been: not domination, not intimidation, not becoming feared, becoming impossible. To betray yourself, the world may misunderstand you. Let it. The world may underestimate you. Let it. The world may never know how many battles you fought alone. That knowledge belongs to you, and maybe that is enough. Because the greatest victory is not proving your worth to the world. It is reaching the point where the world no longer decides it. They believed they were creating someone weaker. With every disappointment, someone quieter. With every rejection, someone smaller. With every betrayal, they were wrong. Every hardship became another layer of discipline. Every scar became another lesson. Every ending became another beginning. They did not create a monster. They created someone who finally remembered. That real power has never needed permission. And once a person remembers that truth, they become something the world can never control again.